as a dismal science, what a boring subject. But this is going to be the most entertaining session. There will be limericks, there will be Urdu shairi. You are all going to have a lot of fun. On that note,
there might be some economics also.
There might be some economics also, but yeah, we'll entertain and enlighten. So let me begin this, therefore, with a limerick I have written to introduce my friend. The economy is in free fall. I get this request from one and all. Please explain what's wrong. Don't tell us what's going on. And so, my friends, Vivek Kaul.
Thank you.
And I have to say that, the theme of the session, as it was told to us, was sunrise within the gloom. So we want to look at the hopeful side of the economy and not just talk about all the negative aspects. But it does behoove us to begin with, to talk about sort of all the things that are a problem with our economy currently. So after we have identified the clouds, we can look for the silver linings. And Vivek, I'll turn to you with sort of the first question. That at the very heart of all of this, that to understand what is wrong or what is right or whatever, we need data. And one of the fundamental problems with our economy seems to be that the data is not trustworthy. कि GDP numbers बदलते रहते हैं, competing claims आते हैं हर जगह से, informal sector के जो numbers हैं, one doesn't know what they are, one has to make guesses. So as a writer on economics for the last 2 decades, how do you deal with this?
Okay, before I answer that question, a couple of things. So the first thing is, me and Amit keep talking all the time, but this is the first time we are talking in public domain. So you'll have to thank VLF for that. So in media terms, this is a global exclusive. So.
We've done many episodes together on my podcast, The Seen and the Unseen, but in that, because it's an audio podcast, we have been unseen.
This is the first time you will see us together.
That we are seen.
The second point is sort of a disclaimer, and the disclaimer is in the form of an Urdu couplet by my favorite, one of my favorite Urdu poets, Nida Fazli. And Nida Fazli says कि कभी कभी यूं भी हमने अपने जी को बहलाया है, कभी कभी यूं भी हमने अपने जी को बहलाया है, जिन बातों को खुद ना समझें औरों को समझें। अगर आपको मेरी बात नहीं समझ में आई तो नहीं समझ में आई, समझ में आई तो ठीक है, और नहीं समझ में आई तो आपको ये शेर तो समझ में आई गया,
और नहीं समझ में आई तो ये भी सोच लीजिए शायद हमें भी नहीं समझ में आई।
Okay, so let's talk about data now. What is happening is that, and there are two sides to it. One side is people who blatantly believe that our data is untrustworthy, it's being fudged. Now, as an outsider to the system, the answer to that question is I don't know. Okay. Having said that, even if the data is not being fudged, there are problems with it. Dr. Y.V. Reddy, or actually I'll come to Dr. Reddy later. So let me give you an example. On 9th January this year, the government published the GDP forecast for this year, GDP growth forecast and the GDP numbers for this year. And the data said that the GDP in 2019-20 will grow by 5%. Okay? So GDP is nothing but a measure of our economic size. On 28th January or 28th or 29th, I don't remember the date, another set of data was published in which last year's GDP number, 2018-19, was revised. And it was revised to be lower. So let's say if it was 100 earlier, it now became a 98 or a 99. Now because the last year's number was revised, this year's GDP growth went up. Okay. So we were supposed to grow by 5%, now we will grow by 5.7%. So now Dr. Y.V. Reddy had this to say. He used to say that Dr. Reddy was the governor of the RBI between 2003 and 2008, and he used to say that world over, only the future is uncertain. In India, even the past is uncertain. if you sort of read what former RBI governors have written, Dr. T. Subbarao, who followed Dr. Reddy, he talks about this in great detail in his book, Who Moved My Interest Rate, on how, because the data kept changing so frequently, and because it changed like 70 basis points, if you're growing, it's supposed to grow at 5%, and we actually end up growing by 6%, or if you're supposed to grow at 5% and we actually end up growing at 4%, the prescriptions that the RBI can take and implement change, right? Now you may have done something, but when the data comes out, you realize, oh shit, I should have done something else. So without, even without going into the credibility of data, whether it's right or whether it's wrong, and there are problems, and these are problems which have been there for a very long time, and nothing seems to have happened about them.
Yeah, this reminds me of the time this guy goes to an interview at a statistical institute and he is asked, what is 2 plus 2? And he says, what do you want it to be, sir? So, like
Actually,
if you torture statistics enough, it will confess the truth.
So, I don't know how many of you have seen this old Hindi movie called Chupke Chupke. Amitabh Bachchan, one of Rishikesh Mukherjee classics, probably his best movie, better than Golmaal. So there is a line in that movie, I think Bachchan says this, कि जो दिखता है वो है नहीं और जो है नहीं वो हो भी सकता है. So Indian data is like that.
So before I go on to my next question for Vivek, I also want to add a slight observation about GDP. The gentleman known as the father of the GDP, Simon Kuznets, he was very against government spending being included in GDP because that makes it easy for governments to then gain what the GDP is. For example, a government which wants to show that the economy is doing well, for which people use the GDP as a measure, can just endlessly dig ditches, fill them up, dig ditches, fill them up, and iterate endlessly. And every time they do this, the GDP is going up, but the economy isn't doing better. It's there's an opportunity cost to that as well.
And it reminds me of a couple of other things. So like unpaid work is not a part of the GDP. Now, all the work that mothers do at home, if you were to sort of hire someone to do it and pay him or her for that, that would cost a bomb and add to the GDP. But because mothers are doing it for free, it doesn't add to the GDP. The old joke is that if a lawyer were to marry his housekeeper, the GDP would go down. Because you obviously don't pay your spouse for housework, right? So.
Right. And so, while we can't be sure of the data, one thing we can be sure of is that India right now is in the middle of a jobs crisis. Right? We thought that as India gets younger, the average age of the country is now in the late 20s. It's a demographic dividend, more and more people working. But if these young people don't have jobs, it's not a demographic dividend, it's a demographic disaster. And what's really happening is that you have 1 million people, 10 lakh people coming into the workforce every month and no jobs for them. Right? That's up to between 12 and 20 million per year is the estimate. That's between 1.2 to 2 crores is the estimate. Tell me a little bit about the jobs crisis that we're seeing.
So this will be a slightly long answer because it's not an easy thing to explain. But first, I don't know how many of you have seen this movie called Mere Apne, old Gulzar's first movie. So there's a song in that written probably sometime in 1970, given that the movie was released in 1971, 50 years back, which had this line कि BA किया है, MA किया है. So MA को अब आप बदल के MBA कर दीजिए. So BA किया है, MBA किया है. लगता है सब कुछ MA किया है. So, it's 50 years have gone by and, we're still talking about the same issues. Now to answer, what Amit has asked, and because this is the issue at the heart of the Indian economy, I'll start again with an Urdu couplet. And this is where, Urdu poetry meets economics. Javed Akhtar का एक शेर है कि सबका खुशी से फासला एक कदम है, हर घर में बस एक ही कमरा कम है. Now, what he's essentially saying is he's talking about human aspirations here, right? So if we have a house, we want a slightly better house in a slightly better locality, probably with a one room more. If we have a car, we want a better car. if we sort of holiday domestically every year, we want to probably go for a foreign holiday. So we all want to do a little better in life at all points of time, and there's nothing wrong with that. The problem is, the moment you want to do a little better in life, you can only do it if you're making more money, right? I mean, because nothing is free, right? I mean, everything comes at a certain cost. And if you want to make more money, if you are sort of working for a company, then you need to get a reasonable increment. If you are in business, then your profit margins need to go up, or your sales need to go up, so that your volume goes up and your profit goes up. So if you look at data, and I mean, I'm a great believer in, I don't really talk without data. So if you look at income tax data, okay, now this is genuine data. This is not like, it's not a theoretical construct like the GDP is. It's not a theoretical construct like inflation is. If you look at income tax data, and if you look at the salaried income tax data, the incomes in between assessment 2012-13 and assessment 18-19 have gone up by just 3.6% per year, okay? And if you look at data for the last couple of years, the incomes are flat. Now, people who pay income tax in this country are basically the lot which has the best purchasing power, okay? And their incomes haven't gone up. If you look at the broader per capita income is this year is expected to grow up by around 6.5%. But the problem with per capita income is it also includes the incomes of the Ambanis and the Birlas and right. So the question is, why is income either stagnating or not going up? And the reason for that lies in the fact that investment in the economy has collapsed. Now, this is not something which has happened just this year. It's a trend which has been sort of happening for the last decade. Investment in the Indian economy peaked sometime in 2011-12. And since then, we have been on a downslide. We improved a little in the last couple of years, but this year has been a disaster. And if you look at what we call the investment to GDP ratio, whereas what proportion of the economy is investment, it is at I think 20-year low. Okay? The last time it was lower than this was, I think, back in 2000-2001. Now, when investment in the economy is not happening, jobs are not being created. And when jobs are being created, obviously it has an impact on income, right? And when people's incomes are not going up, or new people entering the workforce are not making money, it obviously has an impact on consumption. Consumption as in the things that you and I buy. So consumption is 60% of the Indian economy. But ultimately, consumption is a function of jobs, income, which is a function of investment. So without investment, consumption goes for a toss. Now the question is, you will ask कि भाई आप तो कह रहे थे कि 2011-12 से investment नहीं हो रहा है, तो consumption अभी क्यों गिर गया? So the reason for that is, if you again look at data, between 11-12 and let's say 17-18, people were spending more and more of their money in order to keep consuming. That is something that has sort of come to a standstill. And you can look at, and how do I make that conclusion? I make that conclusion because if you look at savings of the overall economy, they have fallen dramatically. So what that tells you is that all these years, people have been spending more and more of their income and not saving as much as they used to. Now, this again takes us to RBI. Now, RBI has been cutting the repo rate left, right and center, but nothing, we don't see the impact of that. And the reason for that is because savings have fallen. So, and the RBI cannot do anything about that. So this essentially links, everything. Any economy does not work in silos. You do something, it impacts something else. The tragedy is that a lot of our bureaucrats, and I'm sorry sir, you are in, so do not get it. I mean, at least the ones in Delhi. And this is, again, this is a general comment on bureaucrats, not the ones who are just there. And, in a way, the explanation lies in the fact that we as a, it's the system that we have inherited, so we had Mr. Arvind Mayaram, who was the finance secretary when Mr. Modi first came to power, and then he was moved from finance to tourism, okay. Now, kya link hai? Tourism is a very, very specialized area. Look at how Kerala has developed. I mean, in the field of tourism, or look at how Goa. I mean, now they don't do that good a job, but I mean, look at how Goa emerged as a tourist destination. So there's a lot of thought that goes behind it. If you go to Bali, of all the places, and I mean, this is an example I like to use everywhere, which is, it's a very startling example. It tells you the potential of tourism when it comes to creating jobs. Okay, Bali is this island in Indonesia, which is around 1.5 times the size of Goa. So the Goa is around 3,800 square kilometers. Bali would be 5,500, 5,600. Bali this year is expected to get 6 million tourists. 6 million. India as a whole gets 10 million. So imagine the potential that the country has on the tourism front. And we have so many beautiful places. I mean, across the country. I mean, we have history, we have beaches, we have mountains, and very few countries in the world can offer the kind of complete package that India can. Right? I mean, we have religion. I mean, look at Bodh Gaya, for instance. A random town in Bihar, and how many Japanese people come there. So if jobs have to be created, tourism is such a huge opportunity waiting to be tapped.
Right. We want to move to the audience Q&A as soon as we can, so we'll quickly sort of rush through My next question was about some of the policy moves that have gone wrong in the last few years. Most notably, for example, there was demonetization, which I've described as the largest assault on property rights in human history, where 86% of the currency was taken out of circulation. And a limerick on this, why not? This was written at the time when Urjit Patel was RBI governor. Urjit Patel let out a big groan. I said, Urjit bhai, why do you mourn? He replied with a sigh, Amit, I will not lie. I've been counting the notes on my own.
Poor guy.
So no wonder he left. But tell me a little bit about the sort of damage demon did to the economy. And at that time it was hard to measure because so much of the damage happened in the informal economy, which is easily the majority of our country. So the damage was hard to estimate, and I think was perhaps underestimated. Tell me about that.
So again, a couplet to start with, and so this couplet typically gets attributed to Mirza Ghalib, but it's nobody really knows who wrote it, and it goes like this: कि ना खुदा ही मिला, ना विसाले सनम, ना इधर के रहे, ना उधर. So विसाले सनम, neither did I find God, nor the love of my life. Neither here nor there. So demonetization was a bit like that. I mean, we started with the idea of attacking black money, and in the process we took out 86% of the currency out of the system. Now, paper money on its own does not have any value, right? I mean, if you look at a 10 rupee note or and a 2000 rupee note, the paper that goes into making it and the ink that goes into making it would probably cost more or less the same. Maybe 2000 rupees mein thoda paisa zyada lagta hoga. But a 2000 rupee note is worth 2000 rupees because the RBI and the government says so, and we all trust it to be that. The problem emerges at the level that what is paper money used for ultimately? Paper money is used for carrying out economic transactions. So when you take that instrument out of the economic transactions collapse, right? Which is precisely what happened. So obviously it wasn't well thought through. The other, and then obviously people found ways of, turning their black money into white and so on and so forth. And this brings us to what economists call the law of unintended consequences, which is when the government does something expecting something to happen, but something else happens. Because an economy in itself is so broad and so complicated that you cannot think through everything. Okay. Now, there is this. We tend to look at black money in terms of two things. It's black money is bad, and whatever is not black money is good. Now, so look at So let me sort of take this example. Now, let's say someone is running a manufacturing unit, a small manufacturing unit, and he earns some amount of money, and he does not pay tax on everything. Okay, not good. But he uses that money to, let's say, buy a BMW for himself, right? So BMW पे वो GST तो दे रहे हैं. He's paying 42% GST on that. So here's an example of the fact that, you know, all black money is not black. Or when he pays his employees, those employees go and spend on things. I mean, those employees don't make enough to be paying income tax, right? But when they go and buy something, let's say they buy a packet of biscuits, they pay GST on it. So, you know, there's this argument that tends to get made over and over again, but what about the taxpayer? You know, everybody pays tax in this country. Obviously, some people who pay income tax pay a lot more. But it's not that others are not paying tax. So, you know, because we tend to look at all, you know, informal as bad, this decision was made, and ultimately it's still costing us because a lot of sectors which were hit have still not come back. And especially, you know, look at how a lot of agriculture procurement happens all across the country. You know, the system was largely cash-based, and that cash has still not gotten back into the system. And, you know, we are still sort of paying for that. So, and GST, okay, one more thing on GST before. So, you know, people are having these philosophical debates on GST, 2 rate hona chahiye, 4 rate hona chahiye, you know. There are there are strong arguments on both sides. I mean, I am on the side that we should have fewer rates, but then that's not the point I want to make. The point I want to make is very, very simple. On January 20th at 10:30 p.m., you know, in the night, I was on Twitter and I saw GST trending on Twitter. Okay? So for those who don't understand Twitter, trending is when many people are tweeting about a certain topic. तो मुझे समझ में नहीं आया कि रात को 10:30 बजे लोग जीएसटी के बारे में क्यों बात कर रहे हैं. So then I went looking and I realized that January 20th was the last date to file quarterly returns. Okay, so what happens is people who have, I think, a turnover of less than 2 crore don't need to file a return every month. They need to file a return every 3 months. And what was happening was, and there were all these CAs, you know, commenting, saying कि form upload नहीं हो रहा है, OTP generate नहीं हो रहा है. You know, 2.5 years after the system started, the least that you can expect is that the OTP is generated on time and the form gets uploaded. Now the explanation that the government offers for this is that, but everybody files returns on the last date. Now, which I think is a very specious argument, because if there is a last date, then why should I, you know, give my hard-earned money to the government before the last date? Because, you know, I sort of lose out on returns on that. And, you know, when I pay my GST on something, I still haven't been paid for it, right? I mean, so what happens is I'm financing the corporate who has to pay me, you know, my compensation, and I'm paying tax on that compensation in advance to the government. So I'm financing the government as well, right? And I'm a small guy. So there are these inherent, you know, simple problems at the heart of GST, which, if, you know, the software company behind it sorts it out, and I mean, I don't think it should be so difficult to sort it out, a lot of you know, improvement would happen in the economy. So.
And in the context of what we were talking about, Demon, and in the context of how we think about our economy, I'll just point out that, you know, when we speak about the informal sector, we speak about black money, it is almost with this implication of moral judgment that there is something wrong with the informal sector because you're operating outside the law. But the truth of the matter is that people who operate in the informal sector do so because they are forced to do so by really bad regulations in terms of what you look at, the ease of business and all of that. You know, you can game the rankings to go up a little bit in the rankings, but it's incredibly hard to run a legit business in India. So we should stop thinking of the informal economy as people who are necessarily doing something wrong or criminal.
I'll just add to. So the economic survey, this time's economic survey, has an excellent example on this. And they talk about basically how many permissions it takes from the Delhi police to open a restaurant in Delhi. I think how many permissions, documents, how many documents it takes to open a restaurant in Delhi. It takes 45. Okay. How many documents does it take to get a gun license? It takes 19. So it's easier to get a gun in Delhi legally. Illegally, though, let me not go there. But it is harder to open a restaurant. An average Indian manufacturing firm, again, economic survey data, has to follow 6,796 rules and regulations. Okay. I mean, obviously everyone doesn't have to follow everything, but the point is, even if you have to follow 10% of that, it is not a small number, right? So when we talk about reforms, so this is where the reforms have to, I mean, you have to whittle down these regulations one by one, or you have to make sure that the small guys do not need to, I mean, you give them one code to follow, and they follow that. I mean, if you give them 35 laws to follow, I mean, it's not possible, the guy will do his business or he'll make sure that he has, he's not breaking the law at any point of time.
I mean, another classic example of this is that I've done an episode on restaurant regulations, and in Karnataka there are regulations. The excise department says that every restaurant can have only one entrance because they want to monitor liquor going in and out, and the fire safety department says that it must have multiple entrances. So basically you're breaking the law no matter what you do. And what has happened because of this is the government has become a vast predatory rent-seeking beast which needs to be tamed if society can achieve its full potential. Before we move on to solutions, the hopeful part, away from the gloom and doom, I want to also let everyone know that Vivek's next book is going to be out in a couple of months. It's called Bad Money. It is about the banking crisis, which is what I want to ask him the next question on. But before that, a limerick, which was written a couple of years ago, as you can tell from the protagonist of it. The limerick is called Bakra. Nirav Modi told me, "This is nice. 11,000 crores will suffice. I love committing fraud. I will now chill abroad while taxpayers like you pay the price." But as he will tell you, that our banking crisis is not at all because a few individuals have committed fraud. There are, much deeper problems with our banking system, which affects the whole economy, because credit is at the heart of any growing economy. So can you elaborate a little bit on it?
Okay, our banking system has been going through a huge problem over the last decade, and the bad loans, a bad loan is essentially any loan which hasn't been repaid for 90 days or more. Okay? The bad loans sort of peaked at 10,36,000 crore as of March 2019, and they've been coming down. Now, obviously, a lot of this has to do with corporate fraud. Corporates took on money and they didn't repay it. But there was a lot of corporate default also because corporates took on money wanting to launch businesses, but they weren't able to launch businesses because they got stuck in the rigmarole of India's laws. I mean, someone couldn't get land, someone couldn't get environmental permission, someone couldn't get other permissions, and so on and so forth. So it's not just about corporate fraud. I mean, we tend to equate the banking crisis to guys like Vijay Mallya and Nirav Modi, which is true. It's not like they didn't do anything; they did. But there is a bigger story out there. Also, a lot of the biggest corporate defaulters people don't know about. So, who do you think is the biggest corporate defaulter in India? Let me ask the audience. How can government be a corporate defaulter?
Government is the biggest thief.
Not the defaulter. Huh? JP is a big one. SR is second biggest. Adani ne default nahi kiya abhi tak, please. No, not Anil Ambani. See, so no one really knows who is the biggest corporate defaulter in India. The biggest corporate defaulter in India is a company called Bhushan Steel. Okay. They defaulted on a total amount of 56,000 and few crores. So now one of the things which I realized while writing the book, I wanted to see, who are these guys? We all know, I mean, if Vijay Mallya were to come here, we would know, right? If Nirav Modi were to come here, we would know. If Anil Ambani were to walk into this room, we would know. But if Brij Bhushan Singhal, who was the chairman of Bhushan Steel, were to walk into his room, he could very well come and sit here, listen to what we have to say and walk out.
Hey Brij, what's up, man?
So, no one could know. And if you Google, you will get very few pictures of his. So he's a very low profile sort of guy. So the point I'm trying to make here is that, a lot of people defaulted, but because they were low profile, the media didn't go after them, right? But because Mallya was like, he was seen partying and pop singers, what was his name? Iglesias, huh? Because Enrique Iglesias came for his 60th birthday party, and so poor, I mean, not poor guy, but yeah, I mean, he sort of got a lot more flack than he should have. I mean, he defaulted on 9,000 euros, right? So he got a lot. So he essentially became a poster boy of the entire thing. He and Nirav Modi both. Now the point is, what happens is because because there have been so many defaults, what is happening is, and this is again something people don't realize, is that the banking system in India is getting privatized. Not the banks, the banking system. Public sector banks had around 73-74% of the market around 7-8 years back. Now they have just 58% of the market. And believe me, if this is the way it continues, HDFC Bank will be the biggest bank in the country in 5-7 years' time. I mean, the way they are growing. So the larger point I'm trying to make is that the government should treat its banks as an investment, not as an owner. So I can understand the government has social sector obligations, but you don't need 18 banks to fulfill those obligations. I mean, you can own State Bank, Canara Bank, Punjab National Bank, Union Bank, but you don't have to own Indian Overseas Bank, right? You don't have to own IDBI Bank. So IDBI anyway, they have plans of selling out, and which is a very good thing. If our banking sector is not sorted out, and it's not sorted out quickly, there will be problems for the economy. Now the next big problem that the banking sector will face is from the real estate sector. Now these guys have somehow managed to sort of stay afloat all these years without being able to sell. But that has to come to an end at some point of time, right? I mean, unless they cut prices, there is no way they are going to clear the inventory that they have. And in the process, a few builders have to go bust. I mean, if you cut prices, you will go bust eventually. But the system will get cleaned up. And it is very, very important for the real estate sector to get cleaned up, because if you look at the history of economic development, countries which move from being economically weak to economically strong have a very strong real estate sector. And that is very important because you need to move people away from agricultural employment. Now, agriculture employs 43% of India's workforce. It contributes 15 to 16% of India's GDP. So obviously there is huge disguised unemployment in agriculture. It has many more people than is required. So how do you move those low-skilled workers? You move them only when you have a very, very vibrant real estate sector, which can take on a lot of manual labor, or as economists would say, India's competitive advantage is labor, which basically means that we have too many people who do not have enough skills in life. So.
And we should clarify here that one thing we have both agreed on, and a lot of economists sort of have a consensus on, is that whatever economic crisis we are in right now is not necessarily the fault of one government or the other. Essentially, since 2011, we have been in very bad shape, made a lot of really bad decisions which are now coming to fruit today. There's a very good book on this by Pooja Mehra called The Lost Decade. I recommend you read it. It's time for us to now get hopeful. Vivek gets a lot of flack on social media when people say that, bro, you only talk about the bad news. What about the good news? I'll give you some more bad news. So we have 1 minute to go for the audience Q&A. So give us some good news till then, and hopefully the audience Q&A will draw out more good news.
Okay, so I think a few good things that I can see happening is I think the best decision in this year's budget was the decision to disinvest a part of the Life Insurance Corporation of India. I mean, a lot of people don't agree with me on that. But LIC as an organization has been so opaque over the years that the moment you start the process of listing it, a lot of the financial system will start getting cleaner. A lot of dirt which has been accumulated over the years and which no one really knows about will start to come out. So I think that was a very, very brave decision, and I just hope that they are able to go through it. The decision to disinvest Air India, and if you look at the terms and conditions this time around, they are a lot better than the terms and conditions when they tried to sell Air India the last time around, where it was set up, the entire thing was set up for failure. So I hope that they're able to sell Air India. And then there is also talk about selling out IDBI Bank, which is something that should be done very, very quickly. I mean, there is no reason for the government to own IDBI Bank. I mean, if you have a State Bank of India, why do you need IDBI Bank? Then the other good thing in the budget was that the finance minister spoke about exports, and what she talked about was very, very important. And I mean, and this is something that people should have been talking 10 years back. That countries which have done well on the export front in the last 30, 40 years have done so by being a part of global supply chains. So, which basically means that an iPod may find, sorry, what's the phone? iPhone. The iPhone may be, I have a cheap Xiaomi phone, so I keep. So the iPhone may be designed in the US, but it is assembled in China, and all the whatever goes into the iPhone comes from various parts of the world, right? So China was successful on the export front because it became a part of the global supply chain. Now India needs to become a part of the global supply chain, and the good thing is that the government is talking about that. The bad thing is that at the same time we are talking about protectionism. Be Indian, buy Indian. Okay. I have a problem with that. I firmly believe be Indian, buy the best. For the simple reason that our money that we make is hard earned, and we shouldn't be buying shoddy products for that. People talk about the fact that we have a huge trade deficit with China, which basically means that we import we import a lot from China, but we export very less to China. But at the end of the day, no one is forcing anyone to buy Chinese products, right? People are doing it out of their own volition. I mean, if you buy a phone, which is now almost all phones are being assembled in India, but the inputs still come from China. If you buy a phone, you're buying it because there is no better Indian option available, right? I mean, it's not like, we all want to buy stuff from China. Or, the example that I gave the other day in Amit's show is, for people who grew up in the 80s, especially in parts of eastern India, during Holi, we used to have these pichkaris made of very, very bad plastic. Now look at the made in China pichkaris. They're superb. I mean, and that happened because those pichkaris came from China. I mean, no Indian entrepreneur made it, right? I mean, if they had, we would have bought it. The other problem is, what people don't realize is that when you let imports into the country, your own manufacturers have an opportunity of getting competitive. And if you don't get competitive, you can never be a part of the global supply chain. I mean, it's as simple as that. So you cannot talk export dreams and protectionism at the same time. It cannot be, it's not possible. Okay, one last thing and then we'll... Okay, so a couple of things. One program that the government doesn't get enough credit for is the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, and I mean, I also didn't buy into it until I went to Ranchi in December 2018, and I sort of went in and around. I mean, I grew up in Ranchi, so I went in and around, let's say 40. I went around 40 to 50 kilometers outside the city, and I saw some reasonably good work being done, and then obviously one sort of cross-references it with data. So that, I think, is a very good thing happening, because what people don't realize is that when you make a house, there is a huge multiplier effect. So you need things to make a house. I mean, you need cement, you need bricks, you need sand, whatever. So obviously when you're making a house, all these industries get business. Once a house, the physical structure is ready, you need stuff to make that livable as well, right? So the multiplier effect when housing construction happens is huge, which is why I say that the real estate prices need to crash, builders need to go bust. I'm sorry, where is... You're there, right? Sorry.
इसको अपनी बुलाएंगे festival में.
And the job creation that will happen because of that will be huge, because we all want a good house to live in. I mean, who doesn't want a house to live in, right? And again, there's this thing that millennials are not buying homes. They are staying with their parents, and this is the new logic going around. Now the problem is, yeah, how will millennials buy homes? An average house in the top 8 Indian cities costs 80 lakh rupees. अगर आप उसको मतलब 20 लाख रुपए अगर आप डाउन पेमेंट भी करेंगे, 60 लाख का लोन लेंगे, 60 लाख के लोन पे करीब 53-54 हजार रुपए EMI आएगा, तो 54 हजार रुपए EMI आएगा, तो कम से कम 1.5 लाख रुपए तनख्वाह तो होनी चाहिए after tax. So which basically means 18 lakh 24. CTC should be at least 24-25 lakh rupees. I mean, how many millennials in their first few years are making that kind of money? I mean, very, very few.
Great, so we have to move on to our Q&A, but I agree with all of you that we could listen to Vivek endlessly, so I would recommend that you guys check out my podcast, Seen in the Unseen, at seenunseen.in. We had an episode released today on the budget, and we have more than 20 episodes. Each episode is about 2.5 hours long, so you can do the math on how many hours of Vivek talking there is on that. Let's go in for the audience Q&A. Because we are out of time, I'll have one very quick request. Nobody please make a statement. एक sentence में आप question बताओ, नहीं तो mic किसी और को दे देंगे. This gentleman in the front, I think.
Vivek, just one question. RBI surplus bank, the government distributed to corporates. Yashwant, RBI surplus which was handed over to the government was distributed to corporates, and Yashwant Sinha, the last minister, said that it should have been diverted to economy. Just your comments.
Yeah. So, I have been saying this for a while. I mean, from the day the government decided to cut corporate income tax, and I wrote a long piece on it in the Mint as well, that instead of the corporate income tax, what should have been cut was the personal income tax. Now, this does not mean that corporate income tax rates in India should not go down. I mean, they need to go down because that makes corporates competitive in comparison to other countries in and around us. But this was not the time to do it. The time, because what would have happened is, the quickest way to distribute money to people in this country is to cut the income tax rate, right? And people would have, taken that money, either saved it. If they had saved it, that would also have been good because our savings have crashed. If they would have spent it, it would have been better. That did not happen because the logic was that corporates will get a low rate and then they'll cut their prices and then people will spend money, but the corporates didn't cut prices.
Right, and female participation in the workforce may be low, but in Q&A we will ensure it is high. The lady in the black t-shirt.
Thing that because even China is very I was reading that China is also very opaque about its dealing, including the public finance of the party. So how is it that the China being opaque about everything has been able to do well?
Okay.
Not us.
No, I get your answer. Question how it works is that obviously the country is divided into states and then states are divided into districts. And each state, each district is under a party in charge. Okay? Now your progress in the party depends on the progress of your region. Okay? So the incentive is very, very corporate, if I may say so. The problem is they don't have democracy. Okay. Now a lot of, and I get this argument quite a lot in the investor conferences I speak at, and it irritates me no end when people say that India needs a benevolent dictator. Okay. And the logic they give is, look at China, look at Singapore. I mean, Singapore is as big as, or even smaller than Andheri in Bombay, right? That's hardly an example. So, the problem is, for every China, there is a Cambodia. For every Singapore, there is a Zimbabwe. So, democracy is required on its own. And which is why, if you look at, if you look at history, in 1945, or rather since 1945, there are only 4 countries which were poor countries in 1945 and which are now prosperous democracies. So which is South Korea, Taiwan, Israel and Chile. And Chile was a dictatorship for a very, very long time. So you can discount that as well. So basically there are 3 countries. So democracy is important on its own. Yes.
मानवीय हक्का का कोर्स शुरू है. इसका कोर्स शुरू है. मानवीय हक्का का सर्टिफिकेट इन प्राइवेट. But sir, the fact is that there is widening gap between the rich and the poor. Yes. And they are teaching मानवीय हक्का का course.
लिंक क्या है दोनों में? वो भी पढ़ाना चाहिए. And
Let's just move on to the next question, gentlemen.
Yes, middle income trap. I think I would like middle income trap. It is basically we haven't reached that middle income yet. So to get into that trap, we have to first reach middle income. And I would be happy if we reach middle income and then get into that trap. So.
Gentlemen there.
I had the same question. I think the window is
kind of opinions. One, expressed by Galib, Dile nada tujhe hua kya hai, aakhir is dard ki dawa kya hai. So there is one group of people who are asking this question. There is another group of people who are like into this, tum din ko agar raat kaho, raat kahenge. So ये जो division है, इस division में से हमारे पास में हमेशा एक patriotic एजेंडे सेट होते हैं, एक डिमोनेटाइजेशन, फिर जीएसटी और फिर टाइम ट्रिलियन का कल. सो गिवन दिस सिनेरियो, हाउ डू यू थिंक दैट पब्लिक ओपिनियन इन टर्म्स ऑफ इकोनॉमी रियली हेल्प्स इन टर्म्स ऑफ लाइक चेकिंग the debates that are appearing in the...
It's a very good question, and I don't know. I have friends arguing with me on GST who have no idea about GST, who do not file GST, who are salaried, right? The thing is, when you want to learn something, to be able to distinguish that ये सही है और ये गलत है, उसके लिए समय लगता है, ठीक है? समय लगता है या तजुर्बा लगता है, दो चीजें. और तजुर्बा भी समय के साथ ही आता है, वो समय के बगैर नहीं आता है. But at the same time, what has happened is there has been this huge news explosion, right? Now there are so many things being bombarded at us that it's just impossible for an individual to figure out that what is right and what is wrong. So at best what we can do is that probably pick up one particular area and figure out as to whether that's right, whether something that's being said is right or something that's being said that's wrong. I'm sorry, I don't have a very clear, straightforward answer for what you've asked.
We have time for exactly one question. We'll take a lady.
Podcast also, I just got it and I want to finish it as soon as I can. But apart from that, books, columnists, bloggers, journals, anything that can help us get a better understanding of the world.
Okay, so one book that I sort of recommend that everyone should read, and it's freely available on the internet legally. I mean, everything is freely available. It's called Economics in One Lesson. It's called Economics in One Lesson by an American journalist / commentator / economist called Henry Hazlitt. It was first published in 1946, and it's just a superb book. I mean, you don't need to be an economist to understand it. It's in simple English. Another book which I would recommend, and which is slightly more complicated, is a book called Principles of Macroeconomics by C. Rangarajan, who was the governor of the RBI and many other things, and Bakul Dholakia. This book was also, it's got only one edition, 1979, so a lot of it is outdated. But conceptually, it is a very, very strong book. Keeps going in and out of print. So, I mean, the last time I checked, it was available on Amazon, and right now I don't know. So these two books I would really, really recommend. I mean, anyone and everyone should read it. So, we'll talk.
Yeah, I think we are pretty much done. We can continue talking downstairs. However, the next session has me in that chair, so kindly hang around. And thank you all. You've been a great audience.
Don't hang around. You can listen to him some other
Kindly.
Thank you for this exhilarating start to our banyan track. I would just request you to stay on the stage, please. And a nice welcome dose of shairi and limericks in non-fiction. Thank you so much for sparing us a valuable time. The gift hamper contains a book titled Abhishek Push by Mrs. Krishna Chaudhary. The theme is podcasting and the future of books.